So these tips are actually things that I put into action as I've made terrible mistakes with credit cards over the past 2 years. Hey, what's up guys? Pablo here with another video. Now today we have our second video on the channel because we're still kind of at the beginning stage of the channel. I want to still show you guys what this channel is really going to be about. And with that said, today we're going to be talking about finances, more specifically personal finances, which I know many of us struggle with. More specifically, we're going to be talking about credit cards and the debt that many of us have accumulated with them. So today I'm going to be giving you guys 9 different tips to pay off your credit card debt. So these tips are actually things that I put into action as I've made terrible mistakes with credit cards over the past 2 years. And I've come across these tips as I've gone on my journey of paying off above $4,000 of credit card debt. Now, of course, many of us have different situations. Mine is completely different than yours. I could have less debt than you do, or I could have more debt than you do. The overall concept of these tips, though, still applies, or at least I try to make it so it applies regardless of the situation. And with that said, let's go ahead and jump into tip number 1, which is probably the most obvious one out of the 9 that I'm about to give you, but it's probably the more difficult or the most difficult one to actually put into action. And that is to stop using the credit cards. We should only be using credit cards for emergencies, and then everything else we should be paying with either cash or debit. You are going to reduce your debt a lot faster if you stop increasing it. See, because the mistake I made a lot of times, and I still do sometimes, unfortunately, is have an extra amount of money. I worked an extra shift at work or something like that, and I have that extra cushion of money, so I give a payment. Let's say I pay $100 on my credit card, one of my credit cards, and we pay it off, and great, we reduce the debt by 100, and it feels amazing. But then next week or a couple days after, we see something that we want to buy, and then we don't think about it because, like, oh, I just paid it off, it's cool. Like, in our mind tricks us and tells us that it's cool to spend that money again. Now, of course, this wouldn't happen if we're using cash or debit, because that's money that's actually coming out of us, straight out of us, not the bank. We're not borrowing from the bank, it's coming straight out of us. So we'll be able to control it a little bit more. So honestly, something I started doing was actually I took out the credit cards out of my wallet, and then Netflix and Apple Music or stuff that auto pays itself, I changed from my credit card to my debit card. And then I don't have to go through the process of, oh, it's okay, I'll pay it off next month. Or, oh, it's okay, I have a financing plan on this credit card, so I'll just put it there. I'll talk about savings a little bit later on the channel, how they actually add up pretty quickly. But it's the same deal with credit cards too. The balance adds up without you even knowing sometimes. Now, going back to the whole cash or debit thing, and now using the credit, and using that instead of a credit card, I mean, if it's something that we want, and it's not an emergency, but we don't have the money for it, then this actually leads us straight into tip number 2, my bad, which is don't buy something you couldn't buy twice. So I did a little bit of research on this tip, and according to the website that I visited, and of course Google, it turned out that Jay-Z said at one point, you cannot afford something until you can buy it twice. Now, mind you, this is Jay-Z. I'm pretty sure he's already reached the billionaire status, so when somebody like that is actually giving you a tip, a financial tip, you should probably take it. And of course, this is difficult to do because if we want something and then we see enough money in our bank account to buy it once, then we go ahead and buy it. Or we just happen to get paid, or we're getting paid weekly now, we got a promotion at work or whatever, and we get pulled by that, we get attracted by that. And unfortunately, that's not self-control, which is something that plays a huge role into all the 9 tips I'm gonna give you today. Now, in order for you to know whether you can buy something twice, you have to keep track of your finances. So my personal perspective on this is, of course, now with our phones, we have the online banking accounts, and you can just go there and see the, your expenses and your checks and how much you actually have. But I found it personally, because I like stuff in paper still, I found it really helpful to just write down those expenses again on paper. And it helps tremendously to actually keep track of these things. It helps me a lot to have something tangible and actually see how much money I'm spending or how much money I'm putting on a credit card. Now, the other personal tip I would give you guys is to add up everything at the end of the month. How much money you actually have by adding your checking, savings, and whatever else you have money put away. Add it all up at the end of the month, my bad. And then do the same with your credit card balances. Not only does this help you know where you're at, but within a couple months, you can always look back as a reference point and make sure that you're doing some progress. Because if winners keep score, that's a big thing that I believe. And if you're not keeping score of that and you're not sure really how you're doing, then most likely you're still stuck at the same place. And with that, you should also be doing this or updating your expenses at least not every 2 weeks, at least 2 times a week. That way you know exactly how much money you have on a more consistent basis. So for example, I update my expenses and my credit card balances on Tuesdays and Fridays. Tuesdays because every Tuesday for the most part is when most payments are posted or most balances are finished posting. And then Fridays because that's usually when I get paid every 2 weeks. So I get an idea of how much money I gotta put in my savings, how much money I gotta put towards a payment, how much money I gotta do with this and that, balance that, and then also if I wanna go out during the weekend, or I want to do, I don't know, I've been looking to make a purchase or something like that, I also know how much money I actually have to do so. Now we talked about how most of this process is primarily mental and how you gotta have a strong self-control in order to succeed. And that's what tip number 4 is actually gonna hit a little bit harder on, and that is to have an LPA for your checking and savings account. Now LPA stands for lowest possible amount, which means how low can you go on your checking or your savings account before you cannot use money anymore. The way I do that, I limit my checking account to $300. If I see that I've spent or paid or made payments or whatever that drop my checking account close enough to 300 or to 300, then what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna borrow money, or what I do actually, not what I'm gonna do, what I do, I borrow money from my savings account, let's say $50, and I just add it to my checking account to make sure I have that little leeway or that little cushion before I hit my lowest possible amount. And that's the same deal for my savings, except for the longest time it was actually $500, or at least for most of 2019 it was $500. But then when I started actually, kind of stop BSing myself and decided to actually start paying off these credit cards, I dropped it to 300 as well. And of course you can play with these amounts. This is what works for me. Figure out what works for you, for your bank accounts, for your situation. Like we said, maybe you're in a tough spot. Maybe you're in a tougher spot than I am, and maybe you need the extra amount of cash. That's totally fine. That's something that you really gotta look at. And like we said, self-control, just kind of look at where you stand and how much are you willing to sacrifice, the coffee or the eating out or the fast food. Can you accommodate, can you make up for those things in a different way so you don't spend that extra money? Then also with putting that extra amount of cash towards the credit cards, so you pay off that debt a lot faster. Now, tip number 5 continues with this kind of mental or this self-control side of things, or side of race, or this game against debt, because tip number 5 is to know your expected expenses. Now, tip number 4 and 5 combine perfectly, because if you know your day-to-day expenses, like how much you're gonna drop on the commute, how much you're gonna drop on gas for the week, how much you're gonna drop on food or the coffee that maybe you have to get every single day, then you have a better idea of where you stand with your finances, even without having a notebook or without even having to look at your online banking app or the website, whatever you use. So going back to my personal example, the $300 limit on my checking account, if I have $320 left, but I know I spend every week $25 on gas, then that lets me mentally know ahead of time that I'm gonna need to transfer money, so I don't go below that limit, that LPA. And realize that tips 4 and 5, and you're gonna see that 6 as well, have nothing to do directly, at least, with the credit cards or with the debt that you've accumulated with the credit cards. Because if you go back to tip number 1, the first tip that we talked about was not using the credit card at all. So even though it's not directly about credit cards, this is about spending habits that help you pay that credit card off. And moving on to tip number 6 is to put 25% of each paycheck into your savings account. Like I said, this amount may vary. It really depends on your situation. Maybe it's not 25%, maybe it's 10% that you put away, maybe it's 15%, maybe it's only 5%, but it's about grabbing a chunk of that money and putting it in your savings. Because then in order for you to actually use that money, you have to transfer it back to your checking account, and then you'd have to use it. So it limits that spending power one more time. And you would actually be surprised as to how much you can actually add up by just putting a little bit of money away every paycheck. But then again, you also want to be flexible. Even though you've added so much money into your savings account, maybe it comes to a point where you're about to reach your LPA or your checking account. You're not always going to, just add and add and add. You have payments, you have bills due. It makes sense. And talking about payments and bills due, tip number 7 is to schedule every single one of your payments or your bills. If you have a smartphone or a computer, those devices come with a pre-built calendar app in them. or a program if it's a computer. Take advantage of that by scheduling those payments. As soon as you get the bill, when do I gotta make this payment, and schedule it. Now, something that I found really helpful is to schedule that payment 5 days before. So if I have a payment that's due on the 22nd, let's say, which I do, I actually schedule it on my calendar on the 17th of each month, because you and I know how life works. Maybe you cannot pay it off on the 17th, but you can on the 20th because of the check hits that day or whatever. That 5-day cushion gives you the flexibility of not having to pay it off until you can, but still paying it off on time, and that way you don't get hit with fees and late fee charges or whatever your bank does. And you don't end up paying more money than you would have if you paid on time. Now, tips 8 and 9 are actually be more away from the credit card aspect of things, because it's more about your mental strength and how to actually take on this challenge, right? Because reducing your debt or getting rid of your debt is a challenge. And with that said, tip number 8 is to work on your mental strength. We've been saying it all video long. This game, this challenge is all about mental self-control and mental, math and a lot to do with the mind. That's how I see it. I'm a big believer in this. So in order for you to succeed, you gotta put yourself into uncomfortable situations day to day. Let me take that back. Day to day uncomfortable situations that help you build that mental strength. I'm sure many of you have come across it, but the whole taking a cold shower in the morning and staying under that shower for like 20 seconds, or just taking the entire shower at the coldest temperature you can handle. Again, nothing to do with the credit card itself, but by being uncomfortable helps tremendously when paying off debt. And you learn to be patient, because if you have a ton of money accumulated on debt, it's gonna take a long time. So building mental strength helps with not burning out and not giving up halfway through the challenge, through the race. And finally, tip number 9 also kind of goes back with the whole thing I've been saying about it being a game, a challenge, a race. Make it fun. I'm a big believer on the law of attraction, and then one of the gentlemen that I've come across with his content and his knowledge on the law of attraction itself is Bob Proctor. And I remember really clearly, it was either on a video, on the book The Secret, or on both of those, that he mentions debt. And he mentions that if you keep thinking about debt and how bad it is, or how hurtful it is, or how stressed out it's got you, then you're only gonna attract more debt. But if you look at debt under a different perspective, more like a challenge, more like a competition against yourself, then that kind of switches the wiring in your brain, and you no longer feel stressed out about it. It's more about going at this challenge and getting rid of this debt and proving to yourself before anybody else that you can do it. Look at the bright side, look at the positive side of it, and just stick to that and push through the race, through the pain, through the sacrifice of paying it off with that mentality, with that perspective. And that was it, guys. 9 tips to pay off your credit card debt. I really hope they were able to help you out. I really hope, even if not all 9 resonate with you, at least one of them you're gonna put into action, and I hope it helps you pay off that debt. It's gonna be a great achievement when it happens, and I believe in every single one of you that you're gonna be able to do it. Like I said, I'm a big competitive person, so I believe in this competition mentality against yourself. If you guys liked the video, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe to keep on watching more of these videos. It also lets me know that you like it, that you enjoy this content, so I can keep making more of it. And that was it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are amazing. Pablo, out.